I'm Gareth Rushgrove, VP of Product here at Snyk. And I have with me...
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzie Prince, and I am the head of product for DevOps at Atlassian. I'm very excited to be here today with you, Gareth, and everyone that's watching.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So we thought we'd have an interesting conversation, ultimately about a passion that both of us share, which is developers. So I've got a few questions to kick us off, but we'll see where we go. We obviously both work for companies that provide tools used by lots of development teams. Like, what do you think developers look for when they're choosing tools?
Yeah, really great question. I think, what we've seen is that developers want tools that help them, frankly, get shit done. Like, they're really looking for something that enables them to be the most efficient and effective in their day-to-day work. I think automation, anything that can automate and help them move a process on or faster or repeat something that they're doing regularly. And I think probably, apart from getting their job done and doing it for them in that kind of automated way and repeatable way, is extensibility. We're really seeing that, devs are devs, right? And there's always this question at the back of their mind, like, could I build this myself better? Or I don't quite like this part, I'd like to extend it. So we're really seeing probably those three things. Is this consistent with what you're seeing, Gareth?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something you said there. I feel like integrate used to be a dirty word. And I feel like at some point, that's ultimately where we've landed. We want tools that we can integrate into our workflows, into the other tools we're using. Having tools that assume that you're using other software. I think there's not software developers don't want one tool to do everything.
Yes. I think you're right. I think the other thing we're really seeing is everybody has a different ecosystem of tools, right? And it's messy. It's not this clean, imagined beautiful workflow. And I think having tools that fit, like you said, integrate into whatever mess complexity it is that they're having to deal with. I think those tools are the tools that kind of are used and resonate, even if they're not, the panacea, as it were.
Something that has a low barrier to usage. It's fine to go, this will fit perfectly. If that takes you, or from a development standpoint, some other bit of the organization a lot of time to fit into your flow, you probably just pick something else. I think is that sort of mentality of back to your point of I just want to get things done. Probably don't want to be having to deal with a lot of forms or another department or whatever it might be.
Yes, that is definitely true. I think that the shadow IT, the plug it in, it's under my desktop in a different world, and it's just working. I think yes, that is what we all want, really, regardless of our craft or role. I think.
Yeah, shadow IT. I think it's fundamentally interesting topic. It's sort of, I know obviously it was named to be bad. Right? No one put the word shadow there thinking the perception here is this is a good thing. They were no, shadow IT is the evil twin of IT and should be destroyed. As opposed to it being, I guess, an opportunity to use things that were easier. If something's easier, easy sounds a good word. We should favor things that are easy. If it was so easy for someone who wasn't an IT professional to start using a tool and get their job done, is that bad? I sort of feel shadow IT is often more of a sign of something else is easier than the thing you thought was not shadow IT.
Yes. a change needs to be made. I think we can probably see from that. I mean, obviously there's a balance. I think on the flip side of that, we, as IT professionals or operation professionals, is like, well, there's a whole set of reasons why we wouldn't choose that tool, compliance or other reasons. But I think to your point, there's something going on there, right? If I would rather do that and make that choice, that's a learning for us as an organization about how we can provide like the best tools and the autonomy for teams that they want.
Yeah. So I started my career as a software developer. I still write code occasionally in theory. I feel like that wasn't always the case. Like developers didn't always have much of a say over the tools they used. And whether it's a direct say or influence, developers are influential in the choosing software. Like, what do you think changed? Like, what happened to land us where we are today?
Yeah, I think probably quite a few things over a period of time. I won't talk about like your career, but the idea that every company is a technology company, I think that is a really fundamental shift in our organization, and in our market and our industry and for organizations. And I think with that, we're obviously seeing like more and more developers. So just like the sheer sort of dominance of the craft, I think is probably one thing, right? Like the bigger the audience, the bigger the population, the louder their voices are. But I also think there's some cultural things, probably, if we look back at Agile, this idea that it is those individuals and their interactions over the specific processes and tools, like that was obviously one of the core tenets there. And I think what that meant is we shifted away that the individuals or the teams had more choice over what exactly they were doing. And with that, like a management shift as well, not so much command and control, a little more servant leadership. We're kind of giving that autonomy to those teams. And then I think the last thing that I think was, quite eye-opening is the research that DORA, the DevOps research group, are doing, where they're basically saying like these transformational leaders and organizations that give autonomy and choice to developers actually perform better. Like these are the top performing organizations. And I think when that kind of, that's kind of the culmination of like, okay, well, we're not going to push these tools on you. We're not going to mandate that. We're going to give you that choice. I think over time, that's, I think what has happened, but maybe just loud voices is also the main
the strong research supporting what was, again, like some people were saying, oh, this is working for me. And the research supporting that, I think, has taken it to a new level.
Yes.
Like I was lucky enough to be like around sort of the sort of start of the DevOps movement. I was at the second DevOps days. Like I was a software developer doing a bunch of operations, bits and pieces. I was experiencing some of this, and then meeting other people who were doing it and managing people who are doing it, and I think some of it was also in that gap where, and it, like you said, like all companies becoming software companies consciously or unconsciously, needed people to manage a lot of that. And a lot of those people were ultimately engineers, developers, software people, operations people that ended up in management probably more quickly than they maybe realized, hoped, feared. And they brought with them some of that, I would have wanted my manager to get out of the way. What happens if I get out of the way? And it worked. And the research supported that. And I think there's a bit of that as well. I think that cost of integration and the lack of fear of integration changed some things as well. Like if integration was something to be feared, was incredibly expensive, was something very specialist, like you had to, like there's a high barrier to entry to any choice. If it's like, no, we live in a world of APIs, like all software developers have got some sense of like communicate, like two things connecting together. Like it's nearly the easiest thing to do, versus here's a WSDL document. Like, so the prior sort of art of integrating things together was definitely something that you ran away from. And HTTP endpoints with data coming out of them, or now GraphQL and other things, like, actually it's interesting, exciting. There are developer tools that are encouraging it, and it's just got all these barriers to entry coming down.
Yeah, I was wondering also, and I'd love your opinion on it, is we've sort of seen the change from the sort of ivory tower architect to a more like evolutionary architecture, and this kind of breaking up of work into smaller pieces. I think in the technology itself, like in the actual writing of code, there's a lot more creativity maybe, or ability to choose like what framework are we going to use, and we're going to use this new language. And that, I think, when I was thinking about this question, like that, I think also transforms. So I have choice in this area of my work life. Why not in the other tools that I have to use as well? So I'm curious if you think that also played a part here.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think that, again, I think some of that's another area where I think people did it, saw it worked, and told people about it. But again, the research supporting that model working better. I mean,
yes.
I think you can, like with all these things, you can go too far. And like all of these things, whether we want it or not, they sort of swing from one extreme to another. And there's sort of a cycle of decentralization and centralization in all these things happening all the time. Like, is cloud decentralizing or centralizing discussed? We're sort of like, we're seeing that with teams. Like, what can you push down to teams? What can't you? What comes back when you go too far and you regret some of your choices? I think, it's definitely, there's a cycle here at play, but like, the cycle has definitely swung from, like, again, very centralized, like you say, ivory tower decision making, to pushing, like, for discovering what decisions we can push out to the edges. Which brings us to like another area that I think that, like, historically developers haven't always had much involvement with or decision-making authority. That obviously I feel is changing quite a lot, and that's security. You hear this sort of discussion now that was uncommon and now is increasingly common, of like wanting to shift security problems left. Like, why do you think everyone is interested there at the moment?
Yeah, I think, some of this goes back to that same, like, we're seeing this research that shows that, these are what high performing teams are doing. So I think there's some of that. I think the other part is just, if you've lived in a world where security testing happened, potentially months after your core development happened, and you've been unlucky enough to experience how costly that can be, that you're not getting that feedback very quickly, then you're kind of motivated to want to fix it sooner. I think that's one element of it. I think the other element really is, we're delivering software so much more frequently now, and there's just no time to do that, right? Like that, the organizations who perform that way are not going to excel. And so I think people are searching for a model that's different. And then I think, there's a lot of visibility, high profile visibility into security issues. We see them regularly. CNN has, if some Fastly goes down, it's on CNN, right? And all these things that are happening, whether they're security or not. And so I think this visibility of that concern and the need to move faster really are bringing that in. And then I think on a more like personal level, I'm just seeing that developers see these other skills as like career and growth opportunities. These are avenues that maybe we're not open to them before. And maybe, like you said yourself, you were a developer working on some ops things. Now I think we see our teams are saying, oh, like I could be a manager, or I could move to do the security skill. And so I think it just offers that diversity of choice for people as well. I'm sure you have a lot more insight into what is driving people to do this.
I think it's all the things we've discussed and a lot more. But I think you touched on something earlier about sort of how agile played in this, maybe and like sometimes consciously and unconsciously influenced maybe the next generation of people who set up teams in that way. I was talking to a friend who was around the XP community very early, and he absolutely influenced loads of people, probably not directly by evangelizing XP, but a lot of the practices and how we thought about things. And actually, I think one of the things that's allowing that sort of mix that you mentioned of like engineers working on some security problems has been getting everything into code and putting it into source code repos, and continuous integration. Continuous integration as a foundational piece of this problem is, I think that we take it for granted too much. And you talk to large enough organizations and it's not there, and it makes everything harder. It being there and you taking it for granted, you naturally find going, oh, other parts of the organization can solve problems using this infrastructure that we built up. I think the sort of evolution of testing that happened, like testing was, again, something that was done by someone else at the end. It was done manually. It was done by dedicated people who were smart, but often just provided without the tools they needed on an organizational level to really succeed. Like software testing tooling today is amazing compared to what it was. And there's always like innovations happening there. But that we turned it into a software problem and brought things nearer. And it feels like this other things are happening there as well. Like configuration, again, something close to my heart, it was someone else's problem and suddenly it's in your repositories. Like look at a source code repository today and it's got Docker files and Terraform and Kubernetes configurations and a load of YAML files. Configuration became a first class sort of part of software development. And lo and behold, we then hit that with CI/CD systems. And like, I think security is seeing that, and that foundational piece of like the pipeline that you just assume, oh yeah, that lowers the barrier to entry, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think even in my response, I probably assumed many of these things, and even working in a cloud native world, for example, that really changes all of this opportunity, but also the opportunity for vulnerability, right? There's probably a lot more potential vectors when we work in this world where we're all connected and everything's kind of in the cloud, and we're moving from bigger architectures to smaller microservices. That really gives the opportunity for that. So I think, yeah, you're right. We create a world where we're able to do it, and maybe we're also more vulnerable, and so we have to deal with it. I'm not sure if that's also something that you're seeing, but I could imagine that plays a big part in the need for everybody to understand the value of that.
If you're a manager or if you're a software developer and you want to really help build those autonomous, empowered development teams, what are maybe one or two concrete things you think are the first things you can do if that
Yeah, good question. One or two things. So I think the biggest thing about creating an autonomous culture is being really clear about what are my responsibilities? What does that mean? What are we responsible for? Let's be clear about our scope, because if I could be autonomous in many different ways, but if I don't know where the boundaries are. And so I think that in one way that can be as an individual, I want to know in the hierarchy, where does my decision making allow me to make, what are the kinds of decisions I'm allowed to make? But also as a team, when we think about like these stream-aligned teams, like where are the boundaries of the choices we're allowed to make? And then where are the touch points where we have to collaborate? And so I think building the boundaries for like where we can be autonomous. And then I think like a more fundamental thing, just as a manager, is just you sort of have to, you can't play lip service to the autonomy. You can't be like, make your own choices, but my advice is that you do this. You really have to listen to what that team is trying to achieve and help them solve the problems themselves. Maybe, often as a manager, I get asked like, well, how have you done this in the past? And I'm more than happy to share those examples, but not that this is the way you should solve it today. Like, this is how you think through this problem, and this is the choice I made. But the choice may be very different for you. It's more the process of doing that. So I think being clear about where you can be autonomous and then building the skills for problem solving and choice are probably, maybe that's not super, you said right away, but I think that's sort of a fundamental thing as a manager. You should be aware you're there to help solve and move along, and you're going to need to still do that, but not give the answer every time.
Thank you for spending some time discussing a topic that obviously I think we could both discuss for a lot longer. And hopefully everyone listening enjoys the talk.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to have a chat.